jjjound was started back in 2006 by a man named Justin Saunders in Montreal, Canada. Presented as an online mood board, jjjound curated images that gave you a certain euphoric effect when you viewed them. These images often had some of the same color palettes, some of the same tones. For a long time, I don't think anyone, including myself, really paid much attention to jjjound or really knew about it, and they didn't necessarily start getting really big until they started posting on Instagram. Once the Instagram page started off, jjjound seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. Some people even thought jjjound was maybe even like sort of an industry plant for fashion. But a lot of people don't know that jjjound started doing merch way back in the day, and that jjjound was actually more like an Instagram mood board rather than a full clothing apparel line. I think that they did what all people do in the social media space, which is garner attention, build an audience, and of course capitalize upon that by releasing product. In this particular case, it was clothing. Now originally, jjjound was far from doing the streetwear collabs that we know it for today. Sweaters, hoodies, jjjound, Reeboks, New Balances, and whatnot. Originally, they started off small and started releasing tote bags around 2013. But with only 3 years in the game, they actually came out with a sneaker collaboration with an Italian footwear company back in 2016. This is a pretty lesser known shoe collab. It didn't really take off very much, and I don't know that many people have it or really speak about it, but it doesn't matter because it was kind of their foray into the fashion, sneaker, streetwear space. Some of their more notable collabs include the Reeboks, the New Balances, of course now Crocs and Levi's, as well as the Bathing Ape. I personally like the Bape stud because it's such a neutral color palette. It's almost like the white gray Air Force One or the Jordan neutral pretty much, but for like the if you know crowd. Speaking of that, jjjound has kind of garnered a cult following, if you would say that, and it is very if you know, which of course breeds a little bit of snobbery. But I'd like to take a closer look into jjjound and kind of explain why it's so captivating. Now, upon first look, you just see a mood board or a website selling sort of high-priced clothing that looks particularly plain, and it honestly, other than looking sort of nice, doesn't really say, hey, buy me. It's very minimal branding. The whole brand itself is minimalism, which people often mistake for boring or a lack of design. That's probably because minimalism at its core doesn't really need logos, doesn't really need crazy color palettes, doesn't really boast like camos or anything like that. Instead, it's just kind of like the fundamentals. It'd be like a boxer learning a jab, but just perfecting it over time instead of doing all these types of crazy hooks, overhand rights, all kind of stuff like that. You'd be surprised how far the jab just takes you in life. Any street fight you get into, you're gonna throw the jab. Just stuck to the fundamentals and released the best version of it that they can, given their means. I think that's kind of what all minimalist brands aspire to do, or they currently do. But of course, for people who are used to like Supreme logos and whatnot, it's kind of off-putting because admittedly, a lot of people are aware that they are paying for a logo and don't have a problem with it. Now, that's not me, and I kind of don't get that, but a lot of people are very comfortable in that space. So a lot of people have kind of like strayed away from jjjound unless it was a sneaker collaboration or the Bape stuff, because we're still in an era, even though we're post sneaker, where people do kind of pay for the logo. Now, all this being said, I don't think jjjound would be as successful as it is had they not done a few things right. And pretty much what I'm saying is, I don't think anything's interesting or captivating for no particular reason. Even if it looks kind of benign on the surface, I think that if you just sit and think about something for a little bit, even like a nominal amount of thought, I feel like you can kind of uncover some of the deeper things that drive sales. Like, what makes jjjound so good at marketing essentially plain logoless apparel? Let's go back and think about what a mood board really is. If you really think about it, a curated section of images or videos that kind of overall express the tone or mood that an individual or a brand or a group of people are probably feeling or thinking or want to feel. That's actually pretty effective. If you look back at your marketing and economic classes, then in high school, if you were lucky enough to have those, they probably taught you logos, pathos, and ethos. Let's focus on that one particular one that we actually need for this video, which is pathos, which is the emotional side of it. Jound is capitalizing on that sort of emotional, sort of nostalgic feeling that you get when you see images from a long time ago that you like, when you see cool earth tones. Like, for example, McDonald's, they use red because I think the combination of red and yellow makes you hungry. Don't quote me on that. It's something like that, but I'm not like an expert on McDonald's. But you can see that colors actually do trigger a certain response in your brain, and they do make you feel a certain type of way. They change your mood. And since Jound was a mood board, they kind of had that down packed and locked. Another thing that Jound does well is sort of follow that 3% rule that Virgil Abloh talked about. And I'll put a clip in the video so you'll know exactly what I'm saying.
In 2017, Virgil outlined his personal design language in a lecture at Harvard University. One of his points was the 3% approach. This concept was based on changing an original design by only 3% to make a new one. Virgil's Attend collaboration with Nike is a testament to this, as he simply added his iconic zip tag, quoted text, and color tags. Now you might be asking, why does this work so well? As consumers, we love new things, but we're also afraid of change. We want something that society will accept us for, but our curiosity pushes us to want something more, or in this case, stand out. The 3% rule essentially balances the spectrum of tradition versus innovation.
Now, Virgil Abloh took this cue from Duchamp, and Duchamp probably took it from somewhere else. If you don't know what Duchamp is or who Duchamp is, he is an artist that is famous for putting like essentially a urinal in an art gallery to kind of question the zeitgeist of what art really even is. So he posed the question that all artists try and pose in some sort of way, shape, or form, which is, what is art? Now, circling back to Jound, they did a good job of changing things 3%, meaning that while they're focusing on quality materials to a degree at least, they're no Gucci or Balenciaga, but I'd say the material on their products are pretty good, especially when they're collabing with another well-known brand like New Balance or something like that. You kind of expect that New Balance quality with your material or with your products, but with their own products, they just kind of focus on like construction as far as like sweaters, hoodies, or whatever. They may do a 90s throwback to like Athletica, or they may do like a early 2000s throwback to like tote bags or like certain types of hats or whatever. And the construction is very, distinct because it's kind of different than the modern construction. You might notice that single stitch tees have, single stitch lines on them, and those tees are often from the 90s or 80s and back. You'll also notice that the 2000s and up tees, like this one that I'm wearing right now, the Supreme tee or whatever brand tee you have from the modern era, probably has a double stitch line. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, it seems almost like the vintage stuff that has been beaten up for 20 years is on par or as good or even better quality than today's stuff that's being made brand new out of the factory. And I think I'm not the only one who knows that and has recognized that. And I think Jound recognized that as well, which is why they take a lot of construction and design cues from the past. It's kind of a quality over quantity sort of mindset. And that's not really creating anything new. So where does a 3% change come in? Well, it's sort of different since we don't make clothes like that anymore, but I'd say that's not a big enough change to say they've done anything. Jound's 3% change kind of comes in with their minimal branding and their curation. For example, something small like a tag that says your brand name, or a certain amount of droop and slouch to a shoulder, or the decision to use raglan or double hems or double seams, double stitching on your seams, whatever the case may be, I think kind of speaks a lot for what you're trying to go towards. For example, Carhartt uses double stitching to reinforce their clothes so they can be stronger and actually stand up to like harsh weather or just being beaten down by literal working men. Of course, Carhartt did not invent pants, but they changed it just enough to sort of say they put their touch on it, and they of course put a minimal patch with the Carhartt logo and name somewhere, usually on the back pocket, and that's usually all. Jound kind of took that same cue, not saying they were directly inspired by Carhartt, but they sort of did the same thing in that they only add a touch here and a touch there. The Jound logoing and branding is there, but it's usually in a pretty white or a nice off-white or cream, or even in black, depending on the background. It's usually just a contrasting color, which is earth tones. And even something small like a Sharpie marker, which has black and gray predominantly, or really it's only black and gray, isn't it? Simply print Jound in black on the marker. They've changed it maybe even less than 3%. But I think that they curated exactly what they wanted to put their branding on. For example, I don't think Ferrari would put their branding on like a really loud, gaudy, ugly sweater from some brand like Philip Plein. Not only because Bugatti's a car brand, they don't really normally deal with fashion, but when they do put out merchandise or apparel, but they usually try and sort of curate things that Bugatti drivers would actually wear, sort of tie in that car or driver aesthetic to their clothes. And of course they use Bugatti colors or Bugatti logos, usually on a pretty plain or bland color. A lot of brands, rightfully so, are very careful about what they're putting their logo on. Not only does it have to sort of make you feel as if you're part of their brand or remind you of the brand, but it sort of has to kind of build up a familiarity, I think was what I'm trying to say. And since Jound is like a lifestyle brand / mood board, something benign like a Sharpie marker, I think is a pretty good way to say like, hey, we don't take ourselves too seriously, but essentially what they're trying to do is bring their mood board to your clothes. And of course a lifestyle brand, you know, they focused on more like things that you would use every day in addition to clothes. So you can think Bape or Supreme. They really took a lot of cues from other streetwear brands and other lifestyle brands, even Louis Vuitton, and they sort of implemented that into their whole sort of conversation. So even though it looks super duper like minimal, nonsensical, and almost like they didn't really do anything, they actually did a lot by just deciding what to do, when, and where. It actually takes a good bit of work to curate images, to decide what you're putting your branding on, to probably make some of these garments in-house in small batches, which of course drives the price up. Now, some of you might be asking like, hey, what's the actual clothing or product like? You know, let me see some of the apparel and shoes, like what are you getting from Jound? Some of you may even want to buy things from Jound, but like you're kind of skeptical as there are not very many videos about Jound products, and the videos that you do see are usually just about shoes, and they're not always the most in-depth. However, I did pick up a piece from Jound. This is just a black crew neck, and for all intents and purposes, it's a very regular fit. Now, how much do they cost? I'm gonna go ahead and come out and tell you. I don't like to like hide cost from people on YouTube. I think that's very cringe when people go, shh, or like, I'm not gonna tell you how much I paid for it, which is insane. Like, why? It costs like $175 shipped, and I would say that upon first like impression, when I opened it out of the package, I was like, this was not worth it. All for this little cream colored tag on the side that says Jound that no one's gonna see. But the more I wore it, I sort of kind of understood what they were doing. I'm one of those people that like, I've been into fashion long enough to know that out of the box or first impressions aren't always as valuable as people make them out to be. Of course, if something wows you right out of the box, it's probably going to be a good product, but the opposite could also be true. So I like to wear test things. You can see this sweater has like a raglan stitch going from the pit to the neck, which if you don't know what raglan stitch is, that's what that is. And it's a callback to like the more early 90s or 80s or 70s way that they produce pretty much sweatshirts in general, all the way from like the military to like Champion and Nike sweatshirts. Raglan stitch was popular for a lot of reasons, but for me, I think that I like raglan stitching because it kind of like gives structure to the arm. I hate when I have like a normal sleeve on a sweatshirt and it's kind of like weird. It tucks under my armpit weird or ruffles up weird. I mean, it's not designer, so I can't expect much, but that's why I tend to buy more designer products or like more higher end products, or at least mid-tier like Supreme and whatnot. Just that little extra bit of attention to the construction of the shirt or sweatshirt or hoodie or jacket just means a lot. Now, of course, there is that little hit of JJJjound logoing on this little tag, but for all intents and purposes, this is a basic sweatshirt. Not that JJJjound is a basics brand per se, but they're a true minimalist brand slash mood curated brand. So I think this is kind of on par with them. This isn't the cheapest thing on the website, nor is it the most expensive. And I think that if I were to spend more money, I don't know that if I would have gotten a better quality product. Probably just something with branding, but the branding is so minimal, it kind of doesn't matter. Now, another thing I want to say about the construction of the sweatshirt is like the cuff and sleeve. They're pretty thick, but not too thick. It's a pretty light sweatshirt, but when you turn it inside out, you can see that it's a French terry material. By all means, it's not as like crappy as like a PacSun or American Eagle or Mall Core brand French terry, but it's not necessarily a Gucci or Balenciaga French terry, which is fine. It is right there in the middle where I would expect like a Supreme to be, not quite BAPE, but like at the Supreme level, which is good enough. And if you think about it, the only difference between this and a Supreme sweatshirt would be that the Supreme sweatshirt probably has slightly better material. Well, nowadays, I don't know. And then maybe the Supreme sweatshirt would be thicker, but it just kind of depends. But mostly it's just the fact that the Supreme sweatshirt has a branding or a logo element to it, whereas JJJjound decided not to. It's fine. It makes it more wearable as you get older. You kind of fall out of love with like big displays of like logos, crazy like prints and BAPE camos. While that stuff is cool and can be used in moderation, to have a closet full of that as like a 26-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, it's a little cringe. With a few exceptions, of course, but it's usually pretty cringe. The last thing about the construction I want to note is that it has this really nice neckline. It's like it's folded over, rib knitting, and double stitched along the neck, so it's reinforced. It kind of just starts you off out of the gate with like a more sturdy product. So I'm sure the more I wash it, even if it fades and gets beat up over time, I don't think that neck will ever fold over like how this t-shirt does sometimes, with that sort of bacon neck. I really don't like that, and I think that if you're a young man and you're trying to find a girlfriend or you're trying to go somewhere and make a good impression, I think that that sloppy, drunk, stretched out collar just kind of looks bad. And it's easier said than done to like prevent that with t-shirts or sweatshirts. So sometimes if you just buy things that already had that sort of, preventative mindset included in the design, I think it just kind of starts you off in a better place. So yeah, there are some notable things to say about the construction of the sweatshirts or clothes in general from JJJjound outside of their collaboration items. And this is my actual like first piece that I bought for myself from JJJjound. So I am very hesitant to give you a full review on the brand myself. Well, there you have it, guys. That is the truth about JJJjound. I hope you liked this video. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you liked this video. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. My girlfriend's laughing at me in the corner. I hear her. But yeah, follow me on Instagram. Maybe I'll post something to TikTok, but I hate TikTok, so maybe not. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. You guys have a great one.